This is Matthew McConaughey,
Natalie Portman.
James Patterson,
Michael Ian Black,
and you are listening to
Five questions
with Dan
Schawbel.
Welcome to Five Questions, Justin.
Thank you for having me, Dan. It's good to be here, man.
It's great to have you here. And I want to start off with, your family, especially your father, and how he defined masculinity for you growing up. He said that, being a man is providing for your family. He didn't say being a man is about being tough and strong. How has your view of masculinity similar to his? And what have you done to make it your own?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, my dad was raised with the idea that a man provides for his family and a man figures stuff out himself. And he was raised by an immigrant who came to America and had to make it on his own and figure it out. And he passed that down to me. And it's something that I still struggle with, right? But the blessing was that my dad also believed that men are allowed to feel and that it's okay to feel and have emotion. But where he got stuck was that he wasn't comfortable being vulnerable. And I believe there's a difference between being emotional and being vulnerable. Being emotional is simply being willing to express your emotions as you feel them. Being vulnerable is being willing to express something that makes you vulnerable to attack and that society might deem as weak or can be used against you. So our biggest difference is that I believe that one of the aspects of being a man, one of the things we need to undefine as a society to make room for is the idea that vulnerability is true strength. That being willing to share with another man, friend, woman, person, something that you are struggling with. When you feel shame and stuck in something, when you're willing to share that with another person, that is an example of strength. And that is separate from the idea of being willing to express your emotions, because being emotional isn't being vulnerable. Being vulnerable is that thing that's uncomfortable that you feel resistance to in your daily life. Being willing to share that and ask for help as a man, I believe should be included in the definition of what it means to be a man.
I agree with you, but I know from your childhood and even my childhood, being vulnerable and expressing your emotions is perceived as weakness. And as a result of that, you were bullied pretty relentlessly as I was as well.
Yeah,
and so your view, like basically it's gone from in your head a weakness potentially, or you felt like it was a weakness because you were showing vulnerability in your childhood, to now you're seeing the upside of vulnerability. And I think vulnerability has been at least somewhat destigmatized, much like therapy and other things in our society, where being vulnerable today, there's a little bit more safe space than there was when we were growing up.
I 100% agree. I think that we're going to have a challenge on the horizon, though. And this is not something that's easy to talk about or that's being talked about yet. But what I see, what I'm fearful of is that we are making vulnerability congratulatory. It's not just becoming accepted. It's becoming congratulatory, in a way where we are enmeshing social media and likes and follows and all of the the dopamine hits and the rushes and the triggers we get from our Pavlovian-like response to social media. We are enmeshing that with vulnerability, and that's where I'm a little concerned, and where I believe it's going to get hairy and dangerous. Is that like anything, it can be exploited.
Yes.
And when something is exploited, my fear is that we're going to lose its sincerity. And so as somebody who is attempting to practice vulnerability in a way that invites others into the conversation, my concern is that when you have young folks and folks like myself, older folks, being praised for being vulnerable and having that vulnerability turn into likes and follows, that same Pavlov response is going to happen where when that stops, we are going to stop being vulnerable.
Wow.
And I don't want to see vulnerability porn. I don't want to see a young generation think that they're going to get likes and follows and become famous because they're willing to be vulnerable. I want vulnerability to be the thing that still is difficult. The second it becomes easy and there's a reward associated with it, the second it becomes meaningless. So, and that's just going to be something that an individual, and on an individual level and as a culture, we're going to have to really watch, I think, over the next couple of years. And it's something that nobody's really talking about yet, but it's something that I'm definitely feeling a little nervous about as I'm witnessing some of the trends on social media.
Wow. I mean, I haven't heard of anyone say that, but it really, really resonates because of incentives. You know, if the incentive is I'll be more socially accepted by my peers if I'm vulnerable, then you're doing it to be accepted. You're not doing it because you actually want to build deeper relationships and show people what you're actually going through on a deeper level. So
because you'll get follows and likes and you'll be a thought leader, right? It's like, oh, I can be I can be an inspiration coach, or I can be and it's scary. It's a little scary for me, but nonetheless, the anecdote to that is also just sincerity and truthfulness. So long as we're truthful about it, I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah. And let's talk about the future. Over the past several years, I would even argue maybe the past decade, gender roles have changed substantially. We have stay-at-home fathers, we have female breadwinners. That was unheard of even when I was growing up, and certainly for previous generations.
Yeah.
What is your hope for how male and female relationships will evolve in the future, and how masculinity and femininity will be redefined?
Well, let me start with the second answer to your question. I don't believe we need to redefine masculinity and femininity. I think we need to undefine them, right? When I first started this journey publicly, and by that, I just mean when people started following me, when I got a little bit of fame acting on a TV show and I was just sharing my thoughts, I thought I wanted to redefine masculinity. In reality, in my conversations with really a lot of women, and on my journey, I've realized that we don't need to redefine either one. We need to undefine it. It is the constricting box of the definitions themselves that create pain for all of us, and perpetuate this cycle of trauma. So we need to undefine it. We need to remove ourselves from the box. And in that, we need balance. There is nothing wrong with being a traditionally masculine man, so long as you don't perpetuate and denigrate women and other boys and men for being different than you. There's nothing wrong with being a feminine man, right? So long as you don't do the opposite and you don't do the same thing. Because as we know, even if you look at partisan politics and you look at feminism and things like that, the left can at times be just as bad as the right, right? It's this idea that, oh, our way is the only way. And that's what we all have to be careful of, because we are living in a patriarchal society where we are told and conditioned to believe these things. So my hope is that there's a balance, and that balance can be left to the individual, not the masses, right? It's not up to the masses to decide what's good for one person. It's up to you and me. My way might work for me, and your way might work for you. And what I pray for the future is that together we can love each other for our differences, and also for our similarities, and not judge each other or bully each other or police each other because of them. I believe that in general, we need to be accepting of our feminine qualities as men. And also we need to be accepting of women having masculine qualities, and understanding that doesn't make them less women or us less of a man. There's a whole lot of work that has to be done here, and it will never happen if we are redefining. It'll only happen if we're undefining. We're removing the box to make room for anybody who identifies as a man to be allowed to feel like a man. And the same goes for a woman. In terms of the first question of gender roles, I think that's a conversation that's left to the individuals. And I believe that, and couples, and the more work a man does to understand the invisible forces that prevent him from doing certain things that maybe his partner or his wife would want him to do, the more he's able to actually see some of the things that are stopping him from his happiness, like the invisible force that tells me, that prevents me from wanting to do the laundry and thinking that it's a woman's job. What is that? Where does it come from? I didn't even know I had that. We have to be willing to ask ourselves where that shit comes from, and then recognize that it doesn't serve us. It might hurt, and put an expectation on somebody else, and then be willing to change it or fix it. But none of that stuff happens unless we're aware. Awareness is the first step, just like anything. Yeah, I'm sure you do as well. I have a lot of friends that have been through the program. Well, you can't go to, you don't go through the program to fix an addiction unless you have awareness of the issue in the first place, right? And you've been willing to reach out and ask for help. We have to be willing to look at ourselves and sit in our discomfort, the messiness of our humanity, and in many ways, use those traditionally masculine things, that bravery and strength and all that shit that's been put on us, to go in. Instead of out, go in and explore this stuff. And then from there, we can start to make those changes. So I believe that the traditional gender roles at the end of the day should be left to individuals to decide. I'm not going to say that men should be at home with the baby and that women should be in the workplace. That's up to them. If I were to decide what that was, then I am putting that same constricting box on whoever that is. I believe that women should have the absolute exact same opportunities to raise a child while working as a man does. The difference is, I also believe that men should be getting paid to stay at home, to be and incentivized to be fathers, and women should be getting much more paid leave. But that's a policy issue. And I think that if we could fix the policy, we could fix some of the gender norms that are stuck in that are stuck in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. But that only comes by having the conversation.
Yeah, great point. And my interpretation of what you said, based on everything you said and plus everything I believe, is it comes from awareness to understand different gender roles and how people want to live their lives. And then it comes down to understanding. You really have to understand. And that takes a lot of thought. We don't have enough thoughtfulness in our society. Everyone's like, can't even sit still for 3 seconds, right?
Yeah, our
FOMO,
attention spans are less
nothing.
than 8 seconds. Yeah, it's nothing. And I agree. And you actually said it better than me. It's amazing that you could distill my 7-minute rant into
There's one more part though, Justin. Acceptance, which is perhaps my favorite word ever. So I felt like when I was growing up, I felt like no one understood me. And then as I got older, I realized that some people actually did understand me and they accepted me, but I didn't realize because I was so young. So I feel like when people accept you, that is the ultimate form of deep human connection, because they like you for who you are and not who the media thinks that you should be friends with or how you should view someone. So
let's take it a step farther, Dan.
Okay.
Let's make it also, we have to accept ourselves. We can't gain acceptance from anybody else until we look in the mirror and accept who we are, right? That's the premise of my book, our enoughness, right? So we have to accept ourselves. If we accept ourselves, then we can start that healing journey where it doesn't matter if somebody is bullying you for being feminine or bullying me for being feminine, right? We're not seeking that external validation in the same way. We have that has to start with acceptance of ourselves. Once we accept ourselves, then it's much easier to accept other people. Because if I love myself and accept myself, then it's very easy for me to accept you, because your masculinity isn't a threat to me. Right?
Good point.
So I love that. Way to go, man.
So you're a father of 2 children. How have you been raising a compassionate feminist son, and what role has your daughter played in his growth as a human?
Oh man, my son's 3. It's really tricky even using words like feminist when describing how I'm raising a feminist son. Listen, I'm raising a son to see women as people. I prescribe the version of feminism that I prescribe to is the radical notion that women are people and deserve equal rights, right? We're the same. We are the same but different, and that's also okay. So I'm raising a boy to understand and to see the power of girls and women, to respect the qualities in himself and love the qualities in himself that soon the other boys and teachers in his life are going to bully him for or make him feel less than for feeling, as an example, his emotions. My son is very much like me, is a very emotional boy. He cries very easily and he gets his feelings hurt. And I have to fight that urge in me because of my socialization and trauma, which I believe a lot of this comes from. I have to fight the urge in me that knows he's going to be bullied and hurt by other boys for being sensitive. I have to fight that part of me that wants him to be strong and impervious, because that's not going to help him. That's what happened to me. And I have to reward him and validate his feelings when he's emotional. Now, there's a difference between being emotional and throwing a tantrum, right? Or hitting somebody or kicking somebody or spitting on somebody. But if he has an emotional reaction to something and he cries and I see him start to hold that back, I affirm in him that those feelings he's feelings are beautiful and that his tears are okay. He doesn't have to hold them back. He can cry, especially with daddy. And the way that I do that is by affirming that in him, but also by showing him when I'm crying. I don't try to hold back my tears, whether I'm happy or sad. Sometimes he'll do something and I'll cry because I'm so happy. And he'll look at me and he'll say, "Are you crying?" And I'll say, "Daddy's crying because he's happy." Or sometimes I'll cry because I'm sad or I had a hard day. Sometimes mommy and daddy get in arguments or fights. And if Emily and I are not in not in a good place and we're arguing and we're raising our voices for a second and the kids are watching, sometimes we'll say, "Hey, mommy and daddy are okay. Mommy does not disrespect daddy and daddy does not disrespect mommy. What we're doing is we're having a disagreement, but we love each other very much. And I don't yell at mommy and mommy doesn't yell at daddy," right? And we try to have these conversations and in real time show them with our actions, as an example for me as a man, how to treat his mama. If he talks back to his mama, I very clearly, I don't let him do that. I say, we do not talk to mommy this way. We do not talk to women this way or girls. If he hits my daughter, his sister Maya, or is or is rough with her, I explain that we don't do that to girls, that boys don't do that to girls. But I also do the same thing for my daughter. And that's what I think is pretty radical about raising kids today, is the way that I'm raising my kids is not different. I'm doing the exact same things with my son as I'm doing with my daughter. I'm reaffirming the things in her that make her beautiful, that make her sensitive, that make her powerful. I'm reaffirming those things in my son. The difference is that I know that when they leave the house and they go to school at a certain age, that the way that I'm raising them, the outside world is going to flip. And my daughter is going to be praised for, and it's going to be reinforced that she's emotional because she's a girl, and my son's going to be bullied for it. And my son's going to be validated for using his strength and his muscles and his arms to fight. And my daughter will be bullied for it or teased and made fun of for it. So it's about preparing them as much as I can, recognizing that who they are as they are is enough. One of the things I do with my son every night and my daughter is I reaffirm in them that their heart is the strongest muscle in their body. And at the end that they are enough. So we say this every single night, it's become a performance. The strongest muscle in my whole body is my heart. I love my body, my mind, my heart, and my soul. I love God, and we're Baha'is, so they say, I love Baha'u'llah. If you're Christian or Jewish, you could replace that with your prophet. I love myself, and I am enough. Every single night before we go to bed, we say that. And even if they don't know what it means yet, it's in them. It's in their bodies, the idea that who they are as they are is enough. They don't have to be anything more or anything less than who they are to be accepted and loved by daddy and mommy. And I believe at its core, the way to raise a feminist boy, if you want to do that, is simply by teaching him that women are human beings just like he is. And there's no difference. And that his qualities are beautiful and her qualities are beautiful. Because if my son ends up being more feminine in the world and my daughter more masculine, it's only a problem if I express my discontent. If I love them for that, if I love them not like despite of it, because of it, well, then they grow up to become full humans and feel like they're enough in the world. And that's the only thing, that's like the first step that I can do as a parent to prepare them for the way the world is going to teach them the opposite of what I'm trying to teach them at home.
I love that. And it's about really being a good person and raising them with good values. And I think that as they grow older, you're going to be able to be a great parent, and they're going to grow up with the right skills and values because you've been through it. You saw what happens if when you were, being vulnerable in school, you were getting bullied. So you almost expect that could happen to your son. So you're ready for it. And then you can prepare him for it at the same time. And because you have a daughter and a son, it's almost like this great experiment. So you can see what methods work and how to raise both of them so that they can grow up respecting each other, and therefore more women and men like them. So it actually, in a sense, for everything you're doing and your parenting, it's benefited by having a girl and a guy instead of two guys or two girls, because you can kind of cross pollinate and help both of them in new ways, and they can both learn from each other as they grow because they both carry those same values of you. And I just want to switch gears. I want to go more focus on advice now. What are some ways that men can start having more deep and vulnerable conversations instead of remaining surface level, like talking about sports?
It's a great question. In my book, I call it the cold plunge of connection. So I'm into biohacking and cold thermogenesis and ice baths and things like that, and I'm into it, and I like it because I hate it, because I hate the cold. And when I'm confronted with getting into an ice, like the feelings that I feel as I'm getting into an ice bath, like what happens and the way I'm confronted is analogous to so many things in life, which is one of the reasons why I love it. I think it's so healing. And what I realized as I was writing my book, specifically on male friendships and connection, is that I have felt the identical thing. This resistance, this frustration, this anger, this talking myself out of it, this invisible wall that I'm like hit in the face with. When I go to try to make myself get into 35 to 40 degree water for 3 minutes, I felt the exact same thing when I've tried to be vulnerable in front of another man. It's the same thing. The same self-talk, talking myself out of it. Nah, I'll just wait. You know what? I'm gonna do it tomorrow. Maybe in 20 minutes. All of the negotiating that we do internally with ourselves. Why the fuck would I want to get into it? Why am I getting into an ice bath? This is stupid. Why do I want to tell him about that? All of those things I have felt. And what I've learned and realized is that on the other end of that, when you force yourself to do it, you experience bliss. So you have to jump into the ice bath. You have to jump into the cold water knowing that it's going to be good for you. And as it relates to friendships, you have to be willing to have that conversation, because if you're willing to do it first, you will find that if you are doing it with the right person and have the right man in your life who's willing to listen and hold space and possibly even reaffirm and share back, your relationship will become so much deeper. And it will feel like liberation and freedom. It will feel like chains have been lifted off of you. That the weight of the world for a second has been removed from your shoulders, and you'll feel seen and validated, and you'll feel a connection that most men never get a chance to experience unless they've been to war with somebody, right? The same, unfortunately, we as men, we oftentimes have to wait for life to throw something at us, or for a trauma or for a shared experience to forge these deep relationships, right? So like when men go to war with each other and their platoons attacked, and their buddies die in front of them, the survivors oftentimes have this unspoken deep connection that lasts the remainder of their lives, even if they don't stay in touch, because they've been through that. Shared pain and trauma. When somebody in the family dies, or when a father dies, the patriarch of the family, and the brothers come together, even if the father was abusive and a shitty person, those brothers now have a connection, that shared pain and trauma, where the walls are gone, and life sometimes has to force us to remove our walls in order for us to see each other. Look at 9/11. Look at these crazy things that happen and how we come together as people. What if we didn't have to do that? What if we didn't have to wait for life? What if we didn't have to wait for tragedy? What if we didn't have to wait for trauma or for pain in order to be willing to share parts of ourselves with another person? Because at the end of the day, that shared connection, that vulnerability is the very thing that makes us human, that we can do that with each other. And when we do that, the bonds that are formed are so deep and meaningful that I believe it will save countless lives. But unfortunately, we've been taught that sharing vulnerable things with other men means that those men will eventually use those things against us. So we've been policed and bullied and taught our whole lives that if we were to confide in another man with something, that oftentimes that man will use that thing against us to increase his own standing in the group.
And we see that in movies and TV too, but it's just like
I see it all the time.
a small part of the time that happens. Like in
So we have
very few cases, but we think it's in all cases, even if that's only existing in our head.
Because men are good. Because
people are good.
People are good, but men in particular are good, and we secretly want to have these relationships. We secretly want to share these experiences. We don't want to sit at the bar and have to sit like this next to somebody in order to be vulnerable with them. We don't deep down want to have a drink of alcohol or 2 drinks of alcohol or a bong hit to need to be vulnerable with somebody. We desire it, but we're trapped in our own bodies and our own psyches. So I believe that we are good, and that when you share that pain or that shared experience with another man or another person, that person will reflect that back.
And it gets easier.
And
it gets way easier
just like a cold plunge. If you do it once, the hardest time is the first time. Then you do it again, you do it again, you do it again. Eventually, you've done it, which means you can do it again. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have resistance to it, because I continue to have resistance to both the cold plunge and the vulnerability. But you can do it. And because on the other end of it is freedom.
And if you stop doing it, your vulnerability muscle might atrophy, meaning that you have to keep doing it. It has to be kind of not doing it intentionally or to manipulate, but organically doing it in order to continue those bonds and continue to practice. And I think you made a super important, interesting point about, it's almost like society gives you permission to be vulnerable during tragedy. Like, if someone dies in your family, people expect you to be vulnerable then, but not any time outside of those circumstances. So that is super important. And I'm glad you said that. And what's your best piece of career advice?
Oh, I knew this one was coming. My best piece of career advice. Can I give can I give 2 or 3 things, or just one? Is it only one?
Only one. I like to put pressure on guests.
Be willing to admit what you don't know. That's what I have right now. Be willing to admit. Well, be willing to admit what you don't know. Know what you don't know. Because I was going to say surround yourself with people smarter than you, or something to that effect. But I realized that you can't even do that unless you know what you don't know. So, and there's a difference between knowing what you don't know and being willing to admit what you don't know. And I think that as it relates to this conversation, my book, Masculinity, as men, we might even know what we don't know, but masculinity and the patriarchy and the forces that govern our existence don't allow us to admit it. So we oftentimes overcompensate, and we make terrible business decisions and career decisions because we won't admit that we don't know the answer. When in reality, just like that cold plunge of connection with other men, being willing to admit that we don't know the answer, or we don't know how to solve that problem, is liberation, is freedom. Because the best leaders, the most success I've ever had as a leader, is when I surround myself with people that complement my skills and empower them to help me solve problems that I don't know the answers to. And there's freedom in that, because I don't have to be this alpha leader that knows everything, that can can lead my platoon or guide the ship. I can say like, hey, what do you think about that? And what ends up happening is you empower other people, and you become an approachable, compassionate, kind leader that relies on the brilliance and the genius of his team or her team versus his own. And when we don't see our blind spots, that's when they become dangerous. So I would say being willing to admit what you don't know is one of the best pieces of career advice that
I really like that one because it ties together everything we've talked about in a nice bow and package. And that's important because I think that what gets in the way of people getting help, what gets in the way of people, quote unquote, reaching their full potential is asking for help. And society's current view of masculinity that you're trying to change and evolve and undo is preventing men from being the leaders that they can be. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of women are becoming amazing leaders is because they have the vulnerability, empathy, and quote unquote soft skills that if more men had those, they could be even more successful. So I think you've really hit on an important topic, and it's very timely. And I appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show.